Okay, let's talk about South America now, and in particular the Andes region, the mountain chain that runs north and south along mostly the west coast of the continent. It's such a large area that it really should be broken down into some zones. There's the Quechua zone, which is, it's not just that it's the area, it's also the topography. And that helps us to understand what were the environments and what were the types of plants that would have been available to people, plants and animals. So the Quechua zone is an altitude of 2,300 to 3,500 meters, or 7 to 11,000 feet, where corn grows well at this altitude. The Sunni zone, which is higher than that, 3,500 to 4,000 meters, there are some indigenous crops there, the quinoa, which is a cereal grain, potatoes, oca and aluca, which are root vegetables. Above that is the Puna zone, which is an altitude of 4,000 to 4,800 meters. That's about almost 16,000 feet, which is open grassland. You can't grow very much there other than grasses, but it's good for grazing things like alpacas and llamas. And then above that, more than 15,700 feet, 15,700 feet, or 4,800 meters. There's really no agriculture that could sustain anything there. That's the Cordillera zone. So this is important because that's the setting in which humans were in this area were interacting with their environment. You're not going to go to a place where plants can't grow and try and grow plants, for instance. But also what zone you're in is affected by the climate as well, not just the altitude. So the large ocean currents and things and big global weather currents affect what type of plant and animal life exists in each of these zones. So on the eastern slopes of the Andes Mountains, it's quite a steep decline. So it's a rapid descent on the eastern slopes that creates a lot of rainfall, and this is where the Amazon headwaters are and the Amazon rainforest. And this is so hard to get to, it's almost impenetrable. Things like LIDAR are being turned to this area to try and cut through the vegetation, at least visually, to try and see if there's anything that archaeologists can understand about this area. But it's poorly understood because it's hard to investigate. On the western slopes of the Andes Mountains, you have a very different climate. It's the Atacama Desert, which is largely barren. It almost doesn't rain there at all. But it is bisected by some pretty major river valleys. And there's agriculture in these river valleys. Also, you have, although it doesn't rain, there are some zones where the sea fog comes in and plants can exist, vegetation can exist, sucking that moisture from the fog right out of the air. So it's not as though moisture doesn't exist, it's just rain isn't falling. So different types of plants are existing here. And then on the west coast, on the coastal regions, you have an extremely rich marine environment. The Humboldt Current brings in all sorts of really wonderful seafood for people to eat. Anchovies, large fish, you have ocean birds, marine mammals, mussels, clams, all of these things are abundant on the coastal regions of the west coast of South America. So what kinds of plants were domesticated? Well, originally we knew that beans were coming from the highlands of the Andes region, and these were found. Some evidence was found in Guitarrero Cave in the highlands that indirect dating originally had it as 10,000 years ago. But again, this is one of these problems. It was charcoal that was being dated. This was before accelerator mass spectrometry, AMS dating, could directly date these beans. And so the charcoal gave an indirect dating of the context from which the beans were found. But that could be old wood. It could be burned 10,000 years ago from a wildfire and made their way into this later context. That's possible. So it could have been a mirage, but in any case, we've now been able to directly date beans from this site to 4,300 years ago, drastically reducing how long ago beans were domesticated. But that's still 2,300 BC. At Penauloka Cave, quinoa seeds have been found, not directly dated. But they are domesticated with a thinner seed coat, and they have an indirect date of about 5,700 to 4,500 years ago. And potatoes have been found. Evidence for potatoes have been found in the coastal region, and we know that they're domesticated by the size and the shape of their starch grains. And these have been dated to 4,000 to 3,000 years ago. But they may not be the earliest, and in fact, potatoes may have come from outside of this region. As far as animal domesticates in the Andes, we probably associate this area with llamas and alpacas, and that's true. And these were indigenous wild species before being domesticated by humans. Llamas and alpacas are related to camels. They're in the camelid family. During the ice ages and before, in the Pleistocene, the first people to come across from Beringia into the New World would have encountered camels. We don't think of camels being associated with North or South America, but actually they were here. And this is one of these megafauna species that went extinct on this continent at the end of the Ice Age. But the surviving groups of camelids are these llamas and alpacas. So we don't have any true dromedaries or anything like that in the Americas anymore. But llamas and alpacas, they were wild species. And 10,000 to 5,000 years ago, they were found in the highlands in relation to human occupation. And you can see that the camelid bones are increased compared to deer bones in cave sites. So that means that hunting wild deer and maybe hunting even wild llamas and alpacas was becoming an increasing part of their activities. So as the ratio of llamas and alpacas is increasing, then their association with these became greater as opposed to that of deer. And so by 7,000 years ago, percentage of young herd animals increased, which indicates that there was probably some cultivation, some husbandry of these. So not just hunting wild animals, but also breeding them and having young herd animals. So llamas and alpacas are becoming domesticated at this point. The site of Asana near Lake Titicaca, from about 4,500 years ago, you find dung that would have been from llamas or alpacas in a corral. And so we found coprolites that show that actually these animals were being herded and corralled. And so that shows that at least by 4,500 years ago, around Lake Titicaca, they were already domesticating or at least controlling these animals. And the guinea pig is also domesticated in the Andean region, but it's unknown when this was introduced, but it seems to be after the camelids were, the llamas and alpacas were domesticated. So what was life like at these times? Well, in the coastal villages, small settled villages seem to have been populated by hunter-gatherers. And these tended to be located in these Yoma areas, which are these sea fog areas that bring in moisture but not really rain. So that gave a mixed economy of the types of plants that you can get from this region in the Yoma, but also on the coast where you have abundant marine resources. And some of these small settled villages, so sedentary communities, coastal villages from about 8,000 years ago. The site of Paloma is dated to about 8,000 to 5,000 years ago and has some pretty interesting information from it. There were wooden frame houses covered with reeds and grasses, and probably 10 families of hunters and gatherers all in one location. Their burials, they buried under their houses, and there seems to be no difference in the burial procedures for either males or females, although males tended to be more frequently located toward the center of buried under the center of the houses, which may indicate that they may have had some slightly higher status. But there was relatively equal treatment of the dead amongst males and females, so it tells us a little bit about their social organization. This Paloma site, also we know a little bit about their economy. So their protein resources were mainly coastal marine animals, but they also had non-marine resources. Spider monkeys, camelids, and deer they hunted for. And they also gathered a wide range of Yoma, as I said, this sea fog area plant resources, seeds, fruits, and tubers from this area. There does seem to have been domesticated gourds that were used extensively, and beans and squash were probably cultivated as well, but they don't seem to have been a significant part of the diet at Paloma. And also from the burials that we've seen at this site, it seems as though they had frequent activities in marine environments. So you have evidence for extoses, which is you get from extremely cold water in the ear. And then also one burial seems to have perhaps even been killed by a shark. There's evidence for a shark attack and probably the severing of a leg from this attack, which may have killed this individual. So that means that they weren't just fishing by the side of the coast. They were actually getting into the water too. Also, there's the period, which we're going to talk a little bit about later, because this is the evidence for the first hints at more social complexity. The cotton pre-ceramic gets its name because there's actually cotton seeds that are found in abundance, and so it just took the name of that. So the cotton pre-ceramic, so there's no ceramics in this period, it's pre-pottery, is evidenced by large coastal sites from about 5,700 years ago, but this is when you start to see monumental architecture. It's mostly gathering of resources, though, and so this monumental architecture of things like pyramids being built, really pretty amazing architecture that is associated with mostly hunting and gathering. There's no pottery either. So their diet was largely fish and shellfish, but they also had domesticated plants, including gourds, squash, chili pepper, beans, achira, and jicama. But the dominant crop was cotton for textiles and nets. And the sites of El Paraíso, Caral, and Espero have large earthworks, pyramids, and these are pretty impressive things that'll let you read a little bit more about. These date Corral is from about 4,000 to 3,500 years ago, so 2,000 to 1,500 BC, and a sparrow is 5,500 to 4,500 years ago, and has these very early monumental architecture that you can see a little bit more about. And one other thing that coincided with the sort of the changes that we see occurring in the cotton pre-ceramic is that once I started out talking today about how we have to think about the context. What is the backdrop in which these people were living? Well, the Humboldt Current, which I mentioned before, brings in nutrients and attracts marine resources that coastal villages were able to exploit. But there's evidence that about 6,000 years ago, the phenomenon of El Nino started to occur. This is from paleoclimatic data that shows that things like marine shellfish in particular, very sensitive to temperatures, shows that before 6,000 years ago, El Nino wasn't really occurring. But once it comes in, it looks like massive declines in fish and shellfish took place, where the current reverses during El Nino. This Humboldt current reverses every 25 to 40 years, and it causes torrential rains with mudslides and flooding. And so this could have put pressure on these about 6,000 years ago. That's about when we see the cotton pre-ceramic starting to come in. So it might have pushed cultures that were largely subsisting on gathered resources on the marine, on the coastal communities, to rely on agriculture and managed crops. And of course, this then coincides with the development of more social organization and monumental architecture and that sort of a thing. So we're going to talk a bit more about that when we come to later chapters. But you can see that there is possibly an environmental factor involved in the shift from very happily getting along with hunting, gathering, collecting, foraging, but when the environment puts pressure on you, you have to adapt. And one of those adaptations is to create managed, domesticated crops, and to organize your society as a consequence. Okay, come back for the next and last lecture of this chapter. See you then.